An airport security officer spilled coffee on a black baby, but the father, the president's bodyguard, was watching every move. An airport security officer spilled hot coffee on a black baby. Thinking the parents would panic silently, he didn't realize the child's father was the president's personal bodyguard, trained to end threats in seconds. The moment that coffee touched the baby's skin, the entire airport's fate changed. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always collapses when true protection rises. The confrontation begins the moment Commander Darius Trenell steps into the VIP security lane of Terminal 7. The bright overhead lights reflecting off the polished floor as though the entire terminal were watching him. He slows only enough to shift his 9-month-old son, Kyel, higher against his chest, the baby's small fingers curling around his shirt as if trying to anchor himself to the calm rhythm of his father's breathing. Darius adjusts the strap of the compact carry-on at his side, his movements smooth and deliberate, betraying years of controlled training even in the simplest gestures. The air around him hums with airport chatter, rolling suitcases, tired footsteps, boarding announcements, but all of it feels distant as he approaches the security gate. Garren Myles is already waiting there, leaning with stiff posture against the metal frame of the checkpoint scanner. His uniform is crisp, but his eyes are restless, flicking from passenger to passenger as if hunting for offenses no one else can see. When he spots Darius approaching, something in his expression shifts, a mix of irritation and suspicion. Darius catches the look, but doesn't slow. He simply nods politely, an acknowledgment offered out of habit rather than obligation. Garren's jaw tightens at the gesture, as if the simple courtesy were an insult. Kyel lets out a soft coo, tapping lightly at Darius's collar. The sound is warm and gentle, but it only seems to heighten Garren's tension. He steps forward abruptly, blocking the lane with one arm. "Sir, stop right there," he says, his voice too loud for the quiet space between them. The sharpness of the tone draws a few glances from nearby passengers, but Darius remains still, calm, his face unreadable. "I'm here for screening like everyone else," Darius replies, his voice low, steady, respectful. He shifts his weight to keep Kyel comfortable, the baby's cheek pressing against his shoulder. There is no defiance in his tone, no challenge, only clarity. Garren studies him for a long second, as though expecting resistance that never comes. "Open the baby carrier for inspection," he orders, pointing at Kyel. Darius lifts the baby slightly. "There is no carrier," he explains gently. "I'm just holding my son." But Garren's eyes narrow. His posture stiffens even more, and a faint flush creeps up his neck. The officer glances at the carry-on bag, then at Darius's measured stance, misreading every detail, building a perception that exists only in his own mind. Dramatic irony fills the air. Darius, unaware of the man's resentment, simply prepares to step forward, ready to comply with whatever comes next. But Garren is already convinced he's being challenged. A nearby janitor pauses mid-sweep, watching the tension unfold. Under his breath, he murmurs, "Watch that guy." He walks like he owns the place, not realizing the weight of his words or how they might fuel Garren's assumptions. Kyel squirms slightly, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Darius gently pats his back, his expression softening for a brief moment before he looks up again. Garren steps even closer, so near that Darius can see the twitch in his eyelid. "I said open the carrier," he repeats, louder this time, as if volume could create truth where none exists. Darius keeps his voice level. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but there is no carrier to open." The baby lets out another small sound, more uncertain now. The crowd's murmurs fade into the background as a subtle, uneasy silence settles around the checkpoint. The air grows heavy, filled with unspoken misinterpretations. Darius senses the shift, not danger, not yet, but the kind of unstable energy that precedes mistakes others later pretend were unavoidable. Garren's eyes flick toward Kyel, then back to Darius. His voice drops to a low, cold edge, one that makes even passers-by glance over with confusion. "Security doesn't bend for attitudes," he says, leaning in just enough to make the words personal, even if you hide them behind child. The coffee hit before the scream did. A dark arc of steam erupted mid-air as the thermal cup's lid flew back, and scalding liquid poured directly onto the baby's soft legs and chest. The sound of liquid splashing against skin was almost drowned out by the horrific cry that followed, Kyel's voice shrieking raw from his small lungs. Darius's reflexes kicked in before his mind could even catch up. In one seamless motion, he yanked Kyel higher, pressing him against his chest and shielding his tiny frame with his forearm and jacket. His other hand grabbed the corner of a clean cloth he always kept folded in his inner lining, a bodyguard's habit, and pressed it over the steaming patches on the baby's clothes. The cloth instantly darkened with heat and moisture. Kyel writhed in pain, fists clenched, legs kicking. Behind him, the officer's voice rang out with fake concern. Oh no, I tripped. I didn't see the edge of, was that a bag? There was no bag, no edge, no stumble, just eyes. Darius turned his head slightly, scanning the area. Garren Myles stood stiffly, crouched just enough to sell the performance, but not enough to mask the flicker in his gaze, the hint of satisfaction that flashed and then vanished. His voice stuttered apologies, but his posture remained unnaturally still. Too composed. Medic, Darius bellowed, his voice thunderous yet controlled. Heads turned. Passengers froze. Some screamed. Others backed away. Kyel's wails didn't stop. They grew sharper, higher, more frantic. Darius moved fast toward the nearest wall-mounted assistance terminal, pressing the emergency call button with his elbow while keeping Kyel upright in his arms. Within 30 seconds, 2 airport medics came jogging from the nearest clinic zone, rolling a small trauma cart. One of them, a young man with a shaved head and shaking hands, gasped when he saw the infant's red-blotched skin. First-degree burns on the thighs and abdomen. He muttered quickly to his partner. Get the cooling pads now. I'm his father, Darius said firmly as they guided him toward a privacy-curtained area. I'm not leaving him. Understood. The medics nodded. No one argued. As the clinic team went to work, peeling away dampened clothes and applying cooling gel pads, Darius leaned close, whispering to Kyel through clenched teeth. His voice dropped low, barely audible over the beeping monitors. You're safe, son. You're safe. I've got you. But his thoughts raced in parallel. He was trained to scan and remember under pressure, an instinct carved from years of watching dignitaries take the wrong sip at the wrong gala, the wrong step into the wrong handshake. He remembered the exact angle of Garren's approach, the fluid weight in the cup, the motion of his right shoulder as it pitched, not stumbled, forward. He remembered the slight smirk at the corner of his mouth that vanished too fast. Where's the report form? He asked the shift nurse after they'd stabilized Kyel. A security agent brought over a clipboard, casual, generic, sterile. Just protocol, sir. A standard incident entry for our internal team. It was laughable. The form claimed accidental beverage spill, listed Kyel as minor injured party, and described Garren Myles' action as unintentional loss of footing. No mention of confrontation. No mention of raised voices. No mention of the fact that there had never been a carrier to inspect in the first place. Darius's eyes scanned the document slowly. He didn't tear it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even ask for edits. He simply looked up at the shift manager, a tall man with silver sideburns and a hollow smile, and asked, I'd like to review the footage. From the checkpoint camera, lane 7. The man blinked. I'm afraid that's under internal review. There it was. The pivot. The beginning of the wall. Darius stood silently for a moment, holding Kyel close, the soft gel pads now wrapped against the child's skin with medical tape. Kyel had stopped crying, but small whimpers broke through every few seconds, like aftershocks from a quake not yet settled. The silence between Darius and the manager stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Then, calmly, Darius reached into his jacket pocket, not the one with the baby cloth, but the one sewn deeper in, hidden behind a reinforced lining. A black phone. No contacts. No ops. Just one number, already programmed. He pressed it. It rang once. The voice on the other end answered without introduction. Name and timestamp. Darius Trenell. Terminal 7. Incident. 17 minutes ago. A pause. Then acknowledged. I'll meet you in 90 minutes. Bring the footage. Click. Darius placed the phone back in his pocket. The shift manager tried to hide his curiosity, but his eyes flickered down. Darius didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he cradled Kyel once more, now swaddled in a medical wrap, and whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. He thinks I'm just a father today. The moment Kyel's cries faded behind the clinic door, Darius felt something ancient stir in his chest. Not rage, not panic, but calibration. He stood still in the corridor, his arms now free, the warmth of his son's injury seared into the fabric of his jacket. The noise of the airport returned in fragments. A muffled announcement about boarding gates, the squeak of wheels across polished tile, and footsteps approaching. Quiet ones. Measured. A maintenance worker in a faded gray uniform, pushing an empty mop bucket, adjusted his cap and slowed his steps as he neared. His name tag, half-scuffed, read Lennox. He didn't speak at first, just gave Darius a look, one that cut through the sterile fluorescent buzz. Then, in a voice just above a whisper, he said, "You don't know me, but I know who you are, sir." I saw the spill. It wasn't clumsy, it was cold. Darius turned his head slowly, searching the man's face for motive, and found none, only certainty. Lennox reached into his pocket and discreetly handed him a small black flash drive, wrapped once in a folded cleaning glove. "Before they can delete it," he said. "Two of us pulled it off the backup line. The timestamp's real. Audio too." Darius took it without a word, without a thank you, because there wasn't time for either. The gesture meant more than words could hold. As Lennox nodded once and pushed his cart back toward the terminal shadows, something shifted inside Darius. The father who had cradled a screaming child was still present, but the protector, the strategist, the trained sentinel, had returned. He walked with purpose now, not toward the gate, but toward the west end of the concourse, toward the exit, or so it seemed. But Darius wasn't leaving. He was rerouting. His strides were calculated, casual enough to avoid suspicion, yet full of controlled purpose. He didn't need to check the footage, not yet. The truth didn't need his confirmation. What he needed now was information. Structure. A battlefield map. Inside a quiet rental lounge near the logistics access corridor, he placed Kyel in a secured sling against his chest. The boy stirred faintly, comforted by the rhythm of his father's heartbeat. Darius reached into his coat and pulled out a slim communicator, military grade, retrofitted, and untraceable. He pressed a single contact, Quinn Dorn. The call connected in one pulse. A familiar voice answered. "I figure I'd hear from you again someday. I need a 24-hour staff log of Terminal 7, Darius said flatly. "I don't want the public-facing one. I want a real one. Unedited." There was a brief pause on the line. "You're not calling about flight delay complaints, are you?" No, Darius's voice dropped low. "There was an incident. It involved Kyel. Someone tried to cover it. I need the staff list, access privileges, and scrub timestamps for the past day." Quinn didn't ask questions. He understood the weight of Darius's tone. Years ago, they had coordinated evacuations together. If Darius was activating dormant lines now, it wasn't about personal pride. It was about containment. "You'll have it within the hour," Quinn replied. "Encrypted file." And Darius, "I know," he cut in. "Keep it clean. Don't flag it." When the call ended, Darius exhaled through his nose, his eyes scanning the corridor mirror across the lounge. He didn't see himself. He saw an opening, one carved by arrogance and assumption. He thought about Garren's face, the twitch of his jaw before the spill, and the blank mask of fake concern afterward. Not clumsy, calculated. Elsewhere, inside a surveillance room, 2 floors up, Officer Redenmar leaned forward with narrowed eyes, replaying the same footage Lennox had intercepted. He saw the slow stumble, the arc of the coffee, the baby's reaction, and Garren's expression, or lack thereof. "Stupid move," Redden muttered, pausing the video. He knew what it looked like, and what it was. But exposure threatened more than just Garren's job. It threatened the unit's record, and by extension, Redden's standing. He'd spent too long working his way into terminal management. and he wasn't about to let one reckless hothead ruin it. He clicked a terminal icon labeled CM, his 7 primary feed, and selected interference flag. A pop-up asked, "Report cause for signal disruption." Redden typed in, "Angle obstruction from maintenance cart and cleaning fluid glare." He hovered over the submit button for a moment before tapping it. Then, he opened Garren's incident file and began crafting a revised narrative. Security officer tripped over unmarked cart. Civilian responded with emotional escalation. Minimal contact. No lasting harm. Aid rendered on site. He paused, then deleted minimal contact and replaced it with unintentional coffee displacement. He leaned back. Good enough, especially if no one else had the footage. Dramatic irony pulsed quietly as the man pressed enter, fully unaware that a copy of the footage now sat in Darius's coat pocket, untouched, unedited, and already destined for review. Back in the lounge, Quinn's file arrived. Darius opened the encrypted log on a secure tablet. There was staff names, assignments, camera access logs, and a strange redaction. Garren's record had a transfer note from another airport, but the referring officer's name was missing, intentionally wiped. Darius stared at the blank field and murmured, "Someone pulled strings to place him here." His mind moved fast, years of threat analysis igniting at once. This wasn't random. Either someone wanted him neutralized discreetly, or the airport had become a haven for unchecked negligence. Then came the next step. He pulled out the flash drive Lennox had given him and connected it to a secondary device. The video loaded. No overlays. No cuts. Just raw truth. The stagger, the throw, Kyel's cry, and Garren's cold look as he turned. Darius copied the file again, this time into a share-protected stream format. Then he tapped into a private channel. A former journalist named Malric Thorne had once been his assignment, a civilian embedded with the presidential convoy who now ran an independent news platform known for its precision. Darius didn't explain anything. He sent the footage with no caption, no commentary, only metadata and the timestamp. Minutes later, a reply flashed on screen. "If this is what I think it is, I'll be there tonight. Streaming. Don't blink." And then, holding his son close and watching his breathing steady, Darius spoke aloud, not to anyone else in the room, but to the sleeping child on his chest and the quiet forces moving beneath the surface. "This isn't revenge," he said calmly. "This is about memory, his and theirs." The dim hum of the servers was the only sound in the chilled lower level of Valmora Airport's logistics center. No announcement echoes reached this deep. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting sharp-edged shadows across rows of locked data cabinets. Commander Darius Trenell stepped inside, every footfall deliberate. He carried no visible weapons, only his silent intensity and a small sling bag. On his chest, cradled in a close wrap, Kyel slept, bandages visible on his tiny arms beneath the soft fabric. Quinn Dorn, a stoic, sharp-eyed logistics analyst with a civilian clearance badge clipped to his vest, stood already waiting by the far wall. The two men exchanged no words of greeting, just a nod, heavy with unspoken history. Quinn turned, tapping a series of commands into a terminal built into the wall. A smooth hydraulic hiss followed as a panel slid open, revealing a recessed drawer containing backup server nodes, federally mandated retention hardware that kept archive footage, even if deleted from public view. "I pulled the spill cam feed," Quinn said quietly, removing a compact data chip and plugging it into an isolated reader, and matched it with Miles's access log. The footage played across a secondary screen, slow, raw, and uncut. Garren Myles could be seen approaching with the coffee cup, lingering near Darius far too long, his feet braced for the trip before he even made it. Frame by frame, they watched the moment the thermal liquid struck the infant. Darius didn't flinch watching it. His jaw tightened, but his body remained motionless. Then Quinn switched screens. "This is Garren's disciplinary file. 2 prior reports, same signature. Sudden clumsy accidents during minor confrontations." "And here," Quinn said, enlarging a document on screen, He was terminated from North Grove Air Hub last year after a physical altercation. But someone recommended his reinstatement here. Who? Darius asked, voice low. No name, just a clearance code tied to a civilian contractor. Quinn frowned. He didn't land here by mistake. Darius stood silent for a moment, Kyel stirring faintly in his sling. The boy's breathing calmed as Darius placed a steady hand over his back. I need the override credential for the Rotunda's incident broadcast system, Darius said. Quinn froze. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. You're not planning to release it down here, are you? No, Darius replied. His voice was like a calm current beneath ice. But there will be a crowd. They'll need to see it live when he denies it. A slow breath escaped Quinn. Then he turned, unlocked a side drawer, and handed Darius a compact black drive with a laminated override access tab attached. Don't burn the whole place down, Quinn muttered, half serious. Darius's response was unreadable. Only the lies. Meanwhile, 2 floors above, Garren Myles sat at a bland workstation inside the Security Administration wing. His brow furrowed in mock concern as he typed out his version of the incident into a templated internal report. He claimed he tripped over an unmarked janitorial card. He claimed Darius became aggressive and raised his voice in an intimidating manner. In his narrative, the coffee container had been full, not half empty. No malice, just clumsiness. He added a signature with the kind of confidence only the unseen can afford. But down below, Darius was preparing something else entirely. He pulled out a separate device, encrypted and hardened. On it, he loaded the unedited footage. He stared at the frozen frame of Kyel's wail, Garren's unflinching face just inches away. Then he tapped a single contact, a journalist whose life he once saved during a failed diplomatic raid 6 years ago. They hadn't spoken in years. No message, no context, just the footage. The reply came 2 minutes later. If this is what I think it is, I'll be there tonight. Streaming. Don't blink. My name is Darius Trenell. I'm here because yesterday, your officer burned my son with coffee. The words, spoken with calm precision, cut through the polished air of the Valmora Airport rotunda like a steel blade wrapped in velvet. Silence rippled across the chamber. No one moved. For a moment, even the cameras positioned in the corners of the ceiling seemed to pause their slow, automated pans. Darius stood still at the podium, the black of his suit absorbing the soft light from the overhead fixtures. His son, Kyel, nestled in a secure sling against his chest, stirred softly but did not cry. The child's bandaged arm peeked out, a quiet testament to the pain inflicted just a day before. Behind Darius, Lennox Vale stood like a shadow, still and alert, his eyes sweeping the stunned officials and media personnel scattered throughout the gallery. 2 floors down, seated in the security delegate's pit, Officer Garren Myles paled. His chair creaked beneath him as he shifted, eyes darting up toward the upper level where the voice had come from. Beside him, Officer Reddenmar stiffened. The name Trenell hadn't clicked at first, but now it did, and the weight of it landed with terrifying clarity. I was silent yesterday, Darius continued, eyes steady on the council, because I needed to gather truth, not emotion. A few council members glanced nervously at each other. The chair, an older official with thinning gray hair and a polished badge that gleamed under the lights, opened his mouth as if to interrupt, but hesitated. Something in Darius's bearing froze him. Something in his composure said, "This is not just a complaint." Garren stood abruptly, trying to regain control of the narrative. "This is a public forum for civic concerns," he shouted, voice cracking. "Not for personal vendettas. I don't even know this man." Before he could finish, Darius lifted his hand and pressed the tiny button embedded in his sleeve cuff. Across the chamber, the main rotunda screen behind the council panel flickered. Then it changed. The scheduled presentation slides vanished, replaced by raw surveillance footage, grainy but sharp, time-stamped and uncut. Gasps filled the air as the video began to play. There was Garren Myles, thermal cup in hand, walking past a nearby bench with feigned casualness. The footage zoomed slightly as he reached the checkpoint where Darius waited with Kyel. Then the stumble, the arc of liquid, the splash, the scream, and then the look. A cold, flat expression on Garren's face. No panique, no recoil, just calculation. The rotunda erupted. Some officials stood mouths agape. Others covered their faces. Reporters adjusted their lenses, capturing every reaction. From behind the podium, Darius didn't flinch. His voice returned, low, unwavering. I held my son as he cried. I shielded him with my body while your officers filed reports claiming clumsiness. Claimed I was the one who grew hostile. And then you sealed the footage. Wrote it off as a mistake. He stepped forward just slightly. The screen looped the footage again, slower this time. A few in the audience turned away, unable to watch the baby scream again. Darius's eyes never left the council. Now the mistake is yours. Garren tried to shout again. That's doctored, he barked, his voice cracking under the weight of fear and fury. That's been edited. This is an ambush. But even he could hear the desperation in his tone. Darius didn't look down. He didn't need to. You crafted a report that said no video was available, he said. That there was no footage, no angle, no witness. He paused. Slowly, deliberately, he turned to Kyel and adjusted the sling ever so slightly. The boy, too young to understand the gravity of the moment, reached a small hand up and touched the edge of his father's collar. Darius looked back at the panel. You spilled more than coffee, he said, the room dead silent again. You spilled what little trust we had left. The silence in the rotunda broke like glass. Council members jerked upright, their whispers blooming into full-voiced confusion as the footage on the overhead display rolled in brutal, silent clarity. Garren Myles stumbled, the thermal cup tilting, the deliberate angle, the splash. Kyel scream. Then, frame by frame, the frozen moment of Garren's face, void of panic, devoid of remorse. The city council chair slammed his gavel, voice cracking. Order. Please, order, but no one looked at him. All eyes were glued to the screen, and then to Darius Trenell, standing motionless with Kyel resting gently against his chest. A quiet tension radiated from him, unshaken, unmoved, like a pillar of controlled fire. Even as voices swelled across the tiers of the rotunda, he stood firm, waiting for the echoes to die. Near the chamber exit, Garren made a sudden move. He rose from his seat, trying to slip out, only to discover the heavy doors were locked. A low chime echoed from the system panel beside the exit. Timed security lock engaged. Panic flickered in his eyes. Upstairs, in a dimmed control room, Quinn Dorn sat before a touchscreen terminal. His fingers hovered over the command interface, the emergency lockdown protocol still glowing red from recent activation. A whisper escaped him. They're not leaving before the truth does. Darius stepped forward once more and, without raising his voice, read aloud from a crisp sheet of paper. This is your internal incident report. It states, and I quote, no video evidence was available. It also claims the officer immediately rendered aid. He raised the report high enough for the crowd to see. Then, slowly, he folded it in half and placed it on the podium. From his inside coat pocket, he removed a thin slip of paper. This, he continued, is the medical report signed by the clinic physician on duty. It notes a delay of 6 minutes before assistance was rendered, and that the injuries, while not permanently scarring, were preventable, avoidable, human. The chamber was still, the kind of stillness reserved for judgment. Then Lennox Vale stepped out from behind Darius. He wore his custodial badge, his janitor uniform still speckled with the day's labor. But his voice was unwavering. I cleaned the area. There was no cart, Lennox said, locking eyes with the council chair. No obstruction. I saw it with my own eyes. That stumble wasn't an accident. It was aim. Gasps burst like popping glass. A council member muttered something inaudible. Another demanded the floor be yielded, but no one dared speak over what came next. From a leather binder tucked beneath his arm, Darius drew a printout of the terminal access log. The pages fluttered slightly in the conditioned air. He laid them beside the report. These entries, he said, show that Officer Redenmar manually altered camera access timestamps. then attempted to overwrite surveillance retention flags. At that, Redden stood from his seat below, flustered, trying to wave away the statement. "That's absurd. Misread data." "I sit down," one councilman growled. "Now." The council chair leaned forward, voice firm. "We need to take immediate action. This is no longer a civic hearing. It's a safety review." A motion was called and seconded in the same breath. Within moments, uniformed civic investigators entered through a rear chamber door. Garren turned pale. Redden took a step back. It wasn't personal," Garren stammered, raising his hands. His eyes landed on Darius. "I didn't know who he was." The words hung in the air like smoke, and Darius, steady as stone, finally turned to Kyel. The child, nestled against him, blinked sleepily, unaware of the maelstrom around him. Darius whispered softly, not for the crowd, not for the council, but for his son. "Now he knows who we are." News of the incident ignited like dry grass in the wind. Within hours of the footage appearing online, the phrase "coffee truth" began trending on independent news forums and social media platforms, climbing into the top 5 global hashtags. The video, raw, uncut, and silent, showed one thing with devastating clarity: a uniformed officer deliberately tripping and sending hot liquid spilling across a baby's skin. Kyel's scream, muffled in the background of the rotunda recording, pierced through the footage more than any caption could. By morning, the video had amassed over 4 million views. Protests sparked almost overnight outside Valmora International Airport. Fathers stood silently holding photographs of their children. Others knelt with signs reading, "Not another drop," and "Security is not a license." Still others carried screenshots from the footage on placards, freeze-framed moments of Garren Myles' cold expression as the coffee flew through the air. Inside his modest home on the east side of the capital, Darius Trenell stayed silent. He held Kyel against his chest as the boy napped, his small legs bandaged, and his cheeks finally free of tears. News anchors debated the footage on wide screens behind him, but Darius didn't turn to watch. The war wasn't with them, not yet. He turned off the volume. Reporters camped outside his gate. Drones hovered overhead, and interview requests filled the inbox of a decoy email address he hadn't used in years. But Darius refused everyone. He hadn't spoken publicly, hadn't released a statement. He simply sat with his son, measuring the temperature of the world by the quiet whir of incoming notifications and the tightening grip of systems under strain. Back at Valmora, Stratex Division 1, the private security firm contracted to staff Terminal 7 scrambled behind closed doors. Their crisis response team combed over the viral footage, hoping to find an angle, a pixel error, a motion blur they could spin into plausible deniability. But there was none. What they found instead was something worse, a pattern. A young analyst, barely 30, sat back in his chair after comparing internal incident logs with body cam access times. He glanced at a familiar name on the report, Darius Trenell, and blinked. "No way," he muttered, opening a separate credential log that had mistakenly remained in the system. What he saw sent a chill up his spine. Level 6 clearance, protective command unit, civilian conversion authorized. The analyst stood up slowly and walked into the office of his supervisor, a wiry man named Benton Marin who had overseen Terminal 7 placements for 3 years. "Sir," the analyst said, voice tight, "I think we poured hot coffee on a ghost." Benton's brow furrowed. "What the hell does that mean?" The analyst rotated the monitor. "We put coffee on a bodyguard trained to take bullets for presidents." There was silence. Cold, hard, and immediate. Benton exhaled slowly, as though realizing the weight of what had been set in motion. "And we thought he wouldn't respond," the analyst finished quietly. While Stratex scrambled, the president's office issued a short, deliberately vague public message the following day. It read, "We acknowledge the recent airport incident involving a minor. We thank all fathers who protect their children. The investigation is ongoing." Nowhere in the statement was Darius's name mentioned. That omission wasn't an accident. It was protection. His real status, his history, and his security profile were still classified under federal retention orders. The White House needed distance, even if it respected the man. Still, the statement fueled public speculation. People began asking, who is he? Why won't he speak? What does he know? Meanwhile, inside Valmora's restricted personnel files, an entirely different storm brewed. Investigators reviewing Stratex's staffing protocols stumbled upon a sealed folder marked Alternative Placement Program. It included a list of officers who had been quietly removed from city contracts due to behavioral issues and reassigned to private transport facilities under Stratex's jurisdiction. Garren Myles was not only on that list, he was near the top. 2 prior misconduct flags, both resolved by reassigning him, not disciplining him. A memo from a shadowed name read, monitor but retain. Optics manageable. Keep in low-profile assignments. Terminal 7 had been low-profile until now. Foreshadowing laced the air as more patterns surfaced, internal audits revealing gaps in video retention, inconsistencies in injury documentation, and disappearing footage logs all tied to a single administrative node. Officer Reddenmar, the man who had tried to erase the spill with silence. And still, Darius said nothing. He declined all legal assistance offered by advocacy groups and refused to let Kyel be photographed by the press. The boy's healing was quiet, shielded, private. But Darius's silence was not passive. It was loaded, a dam holding back the truth until it was too heavy to ignore. At night, Darius reviewed anonymous intel drops from former contacts. Each contained redacted employee movement charts, incident maps, and interview transcripts. The names weren't new to him. He had seen them before in another life. Now they formed a web, and at its center, not just an accident, but a system built to avoid accountability. A former colleague texted him from a secure line. They're unraveling. Your silence is louder than their denials. Darius responded with a single phrase, it's not about silence. It's about memory. The next morning, a whistleblower leak posted by a civilian watchdog group exposed internal Stratex memos detailing the reassignment protocol, complete with falsified behavioral evaluations meant to smooth over each transfer. Darius's name wasn't mentioned in the leak, but an internal note attached to a review of Terminal 7 footage read, subject did not retaliate. Held child. Spoke only once. Calm. Calculated. Possibly trained. The public put the pieces together faster than anyone expected. Independent digital sleuths traced the original uploader of the Rotunda video to a private server linked to a former government protection contractor. Forums lit up with speculation. No one had the full truth, but they didn't need it anymore. Valmora Airport, Stratex, and the council were now caught in a spotlight they couldn't control. Inside his quiet home, Darius prepared a small travel case. Nothing more than a change of clothes, a backup drive, and Kyel's revised hospital chart. He wasn't running. He was preparing, because whether they knew it or not, the world had already made its choice. They didn't want vengeance. They wanted memory, and it was coming. We put coffee on a bodyguard trained to take bullets for presidents, the supervisor muttered, and we thought he wouldn't respond. The officer smirked, convinced his badge would shield him, unaware that every security camera, every witness, and every federal protocol was already lining up behind the father's next move. If you believe cruelty under authority always folds when discipline meets power, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. The room was cold, not from temperature, but from tension. Darius Trenell stepped into the closed-door chamber, his footsteps absorbed by the heavy carpet. A long mahogany table stretched down the center, surrounded by 12 officials, airport executives, federal transport heads, and 3 members of the newly convened special panel. Every man in the room turned as he entered, but no one spoke. There was no announcement, no welcome, only the sound of the door clicking shut behind him. He carried no legal folder, no printed statements, just a slim flash drive in one hand, and in the other, a folded chart of his son's hospital report. Kyel's name was written in small letters at the top corner. Darius remained standing. Commander Trenell, said the man at the head of the table, Colonel Kyel, retired operations lead, known for dismantling security flaws in overseas embassies. His tone was civil but clipped. We appreciate you joining us on short notice. Darius nodded once. His posture was straight, not out of pride but from years of training. I was told this was not a hearing, he said, voice steady. It's not, Kyel confirmed. This is advisory. But we do have questions. Another man, Director Riemann Vale of the Federal Transport Safety Division, leaned forward, lacing his fingers. Mr. Trenell, we've reviewed the footage. The broadcast made national impact. But before we proceed, we need to understand your objective here. Are you pursuing legal action? Darius didn't blink. If I were, I wouldn't be in this room, he said. A pause. One of the panelists opened a folder, but Darius raised a hand before they could speak. If I give you names, Darius said, patterns, timelines, internal clearance trails, will you act? Or will this become another memorial plaque with a quote about vigilance? The room stilled. Colonel Kyel narrowed his eyes. You're claiming a pattern? Darius walked forward and placed the flash drive on the center of the table. It clicked faintly against the wood. 39 incidents, he said, all involving camera feed interference, misfiled incident reports, or timing anomalies during screenings involving children. He unfolded Kyel's hospital chart next, placing it beside the drive. The data was compiled by Quinn Dorn, he continued. He cross-referenced bodycam logouts with terminal security shifts, timestamp inconsistencies, deleted feed records that were supposedly archived. Each entry includes the staff usernames, override credentials used, and the time it took for someone to flag or ignore the discrepancy. Director Vale reached for the drive, then hesitated. You're suggesting this is more than negligence. I'm not suggesting anything, Darius replied. I'm giving you what your system's buried. Colonel Kyel inserted the drive into the panel display hub. A soft hum followed. The screen behind them flickered, revealing a spreadsheet. Not flashy, not dramatized, just rows and rows of data. Numbers, dates, terminal numbers, notes like no footage available or audio malfunction, repeated in a grim pattern. As Kyel scanned the list, the weight of it settled visibly on his shoulders. His jaw clenched. At line 13, he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. We've seen some of these, muttered one panelist. But never like this. Because they weren't supposed to be seen like this, Darius answered. Each one was dismissed as a single failure point. Never tracked system-wide. Never questioned together. Foreshadowing flickered quietly in the room, the kind that precedes a policy shift or a scandal large enough to erase names from walls. Colonel Kyel's expression shifted. His eyes met Darius's. And you? He asked. You're not here to watch from the sidelines? No, Darius said plainly. I'll stand in front of it. Silence once more. But this time, not from hesitation, from understanding. Colonel Kyel stood slowly. He turned to his colleagues. Motion to suspend current review processes related to Terminal 7 and any overlapping staff assignments flagged in this data. Seconded, said another. Unanimous, came a third. Darius gave a single nod. Then he reached for the hospital chart and held it up. I'm naming the new protocol the Kyel standard, he said. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the air like a blade through cloth. No one objected, and with that, the room that began in cold tension shifted into quiet resolve. He did not strike back. He showed the world how memory fights. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecutor carefully unsealed a transparent pouch and raised it into the air. Inside were two tiny, charred socks, baby-sized, faded blue, curled at the edges where the fabric had been scorched. The gallery, packed with quiet fathers holding their children, leaned forward, breaths held. Judge Renner's expression shifted subtly. No words were spoken at first, but the weight of what was being shown, what had been endured, settled over the room like a blanket of lead. Only minutes earlier, the trial of Officer Garren Myles had seemed like it would end with predictable testimony, legal jargon, and a standard back and forth of closing arguments. But this final moment shifted everything. The socks were submitted not as evidence of physical injury that had already been documented, but as an artifact of memory. A symbol, a seal. The prosecutor's voice was quiet but steady as he read the handwritten note that had accompanied the item. No retaliation. No vengeance. Just memory. May the law never forget what hot coffee feels like on a child's skin. There was no rebuttal. Garren's defense attorney, didn't move. Garren himself, seated behind the partition in a navy suit he hadn't earned, stared downward, unable to look at the socks. His lips parted once, maybe to explain, maybe to object, but no sound came. He had been formally charged with child endangerment, falsifying a government incident report, and obstructing a federal investigation. Yet none of those legal terms felt as powerful as the image of those socks, now resting on the judge's bench. Weeks earlier, Valmora Airport had begun to change. The protocols were no longer recommendations, they were law. The Kyel standard, now fully ratified, mandated third-party review of all security incidents involving minors. All liquid-related injuries required immediate documentation and automated archiving across encrypted cloud systems. No longer could reports be buried beneath bureaucracy or rewritten to protect aggressors. And most importantly, the silent reshuffling of misbehaving officers, transferred quietly from terminal to terminal under retraining programs, was permanently banned. Darius Trenell didn't attend the sentencing in a flashy suit or with a legal entourage. He arrived alone, in a pressed black coat, Kyel wrapped close to his chest beneath a protective sling. He entered through the back, unnoticed at first. He stood only when called, not as a witness, not as a hero, but as a father. When asked if he wanted to speak, he simply handed over the pouch. That was enough. Outside the courthouse, protest signs flapped in the wind. #CoffeeTruth, now a national movement, had ignited something larger than airport reform. It had become a symbol of quiet accountability, of refusing to yell, yet still being heard. Many of those gathered were fathers, holding photos of their children. Some had never experienced violence, but they understood the threat of erasure, of being ignored when it mattered most. Inside Valmora Airport, reforms had already taken root. The very walls of Terminal 7 whispered in new order. Surveillance upgrades were visible but subtle, slim lenses placed at baby height to ensure blind spots didn't obscure the most vulnerable. Darius had attended the first training session for new recruits, not as an instructor, but as a presence. When asked to speak, he gave only one line, his voice calm but firm. "Power is not in who you are when no one's looking. It's who you choose to be when a child is watching." That line stuck. Recruits wrote it down. Supervisors posted it in locker rooms. And when the press tried to interview Darius afterward, he simply raised a hand and walked away. Elsewhere, others rose to fill the spaces that mattered. Lennox Vale, the maintenance worker who had witnessed the coffee spill and broken protocol to deliver the truth, was promoted to internal integrity officer. He now oversaw anonymous reporting systems designed to protect whistleblowers and prevent cover-ups before they started. His new office was modest but functional, with one framed photo on the wall, Kyel smiling despite the bandages on his legs, taken weeks after the incident. Lennox never spoke of it publicly. He didn't have to. Quinn Dorn, the quiet systems analyst who had helped expose the timestamp deletions and surveillance log forgeries, was brought on formally as systems advisor to the newly founded civilian oversight body. His job wasn't glamorous, sifting through data, building timestamp redundancy layers, and establishing auto-notification triggers, but it mattered. Every keystroke helped ensure another child wouldn't be hurt, and then forgotten. Yet even with all this progress, the trial remained the centerpiece of public attention. The symbolism of the courtroom, the sight of Garren Myles finally stripped of his uniform and forced to answer, not to Darius, but to law, resonated across the nation. News outlets showed the footage again, spliced now with new layers of commentary and analysis. But Darius never watched those replays. He didn't need to. He was already looking ahead. Back in his quiet home, he kept the original baby socks, the pair Kyel had worn that day, inside a climate-sealed envelope. He placed them in a drawer beside other memories. His old service badge, the signed presidential photo from a job long past, and a folded note from a stranger thanking him for showing what protection really means. In the courtroom, the final gavel fell. Guilty. The sentence, 5 years in minimum security, with 2 years of mandatory civic service upon release. One clause struck the audience as poetic, Garren would spend part of his community service reviewing case files under the Kyel standard, the very protocol he had unintentionally helped create. No one cheered. No one clapped. But when Darius stepped outside, a small boy standing near the courthouse steps looked up and saluted him, not as a soldier, but as a son. Darius smiled, then turned to Kyel and whispered, "Because we won't." The verdict dropped like a stone in the courtroom, guilty on all counts. Not a single expression flickered across Darius Trenell's face. He remained seated, posture straight, Kyel's hospital report folded neatly in the inner pocket of his suit. The judge's voice echoed as he continued the sentence. 5 years under minimum security, with 2 years of mandatory civic service upon release. Garren Myles, still wearing the Navy courtroom-issued blazer, blinked at the floor as if trying to count cracks in the marble. The silence inside the courtroom wasn't peace, it was judgment. As officers moved to escort Garren out, the judge added one final order. The defendant will serve part of his civic sentence by reviewing minor endangerment cases under the Kyel standard. Garren's eyes flinched at the name, like the sound itself burned. He turned once, trying to make eye contact with Darius. But Darius didn't offer it. His gaze was fixed ahead, like a man who'd already read the ending and knew there was no surprise left in this chapter. Outside, the cold air stung faintly against Darius's skin as he stepped down the courthouse stairs. Reporters stood across the street, cameras powered on, but none dared approach. They knew better. Darius had never given them a quote, not one soundbite, not even a glance. His silence had become its own kind of resistance. Yet the story didn't fade. 3 weeks later, a thin manila envelope landed on the desk of investigative journalist Cornelius. It contained an anonymous tip. Garren Myles had once applied for a position at a private child care center, but had been rejected for emotional instability following unresolved aggression tendencies. The application had been quietly archived, never flagged, never shared. The facility's director had made a note in the margins. Not suitable for high-stress environments. Avoid rehire. Corn's expose went live the next evening. The headline didn't scream, it whispered. Paper trail to a burned cradle. The piece triggered a flurry of internal reviews at multiple private security firms. Screenshots of rejected background checks circulated online. Committees were formed. Panels convened. And still, Darius remained quiet. Then, one morning, amid a stack of formal letters from lawyers and transport officials, a plain white envelope arrived at Darius's home. No return address. No emblem. Just his name, handwritten in sharp block letters. Inside was a short letter, just 3 lines. I watched in the rotunda that night. I thought protection meant strength, but you showed us it meant proof. You made silence louder than rage. The signature at the bottom was unfamiliar, just the name Officer Envos. Young, unranked, probably new, probably scared. Darius stared at the letter for a long while before folding it carefully and placing it back in the envelope. He didn't write back. Later that day, as evening pressed into the windows, Darius stood quietly in the hallway outside Kyel's room. The boy's babbling voice danced gently from within, rising like steam from a calm pot. The child sat near the window, playing with a wooden ring stack, the sunset's orange hue painting golden arcs across the floor. Darius stepped in, moving with the careful grace of a man who still calculated corners and reflections from instinct. He watched Kyel reach up toward the light, his small fingers stretching at the shadows. There were faint scars still, not on the skin, but in the memory of the cries that had once echoed through sterile clinic walls. Yet now Kyel only smiled. Darius lowered himself to one knee beside the child. He said nothing at first, just observed. The boy looked up and beamed, showing the lopsided grin of innocence untouched by the gravity that surrounded his name. A breath, deep, unrushed. Then came the words, not for the world, not for the court, not for the broadcasted justice panels, but for this moment alone. One day you'll hear the story, son, but not yet. For now, let your dreams stay clean. The incident unfolded inside a crowded terminal in Northwell International, where a young trainee officer stood frozen near Gate 9, a tablet in his hand, heart pounding. A passenger, A single father carrying a toddler was being aggressively questioned by a senior security agent. The officer, just weeks into the job, hesitated, but then the child let out a frightened whimper, and something clicked in the trainee's mind. He tapped the screen, pulled up a bookmark protocol, and stepped forward. Section 4.3 of the Kyel standard requires immediate de-escalation and third-party observation when a minor passenger shows signs of distress during inspection, he said, his voice shaking but firm. The senior officer scoffed, but the cameras were rolling. Within minutes, a supervisor arrived, removed the agent, and escorted the father and child to a private lounge. The incident didn't go viral because of conflict, it spread because it was stopped. 3 days later, Darius Trenell watched the footage on a muted screen, his fingers gently tracing the scarred edge of Kyel's now-healed blanket. His eyes narrowed, not at the confrontation, but at the pause, the moment the young officer stood still, wrestling with what to do, and then chose to act. That hesitation, that moment of choice, echoed louder than the click of any broadcast. The call came within the hour. A federal civilian safety oversight committee, newly formed, extended an invitation. We'd like you to serve as a strategic advisor to help structure national compliance protocol, the lead officer said. We believe your insight could help shape policy quietly, if you prefer. Darius paused, his past still shielded under multiple layers of federal protection. He had no desire to return to the public stage. You're asking for my voice, he said, but you're forgetting I never raised it. I just showed what they erased. The agent responded, that's exactly why we need you. For a week, he said nothing. No reply. But then a parcel arrived, an anonymous package with no return address. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping, the incident at Gate 9, circled in red ink. A sticky note read, he quoted you. And he stopped it. Below it was a single word, echo. That evening, Darius walked into his private study, placed the clipping beside a photo of Kyel sleeping peacefully on his chest, and opened a secure channel. Accept, he typed. I'll serve, but I won't sign as myself. He entered under codename, Guardian Echo. His first condition was non-negotiable. Any and all future civilian safety protocols affecting minors had to be reviewed by a panel of verified parents of minor passengers. No corporate compliance team. No insurance boards. Only those who had once carried a crying child through a metal detector would have the right to approve protections. When the committee asked why, he replied calmly, because memory doesn't draft legalese, it carries scars. Let those who carry them decide. As the reforms began to take root, something unexpected followed. The journalist who had first live-streamed the Rotunda confrontation released a new short-form documentary. Titled Cradle Shield, it traced the quiet resistance that turned a coffee spill into a national reckoning. Through layered visuals and witness interviews, it pieced together how Darius had moved with deliberate restraint, how his silence had forced an entire room to look at the truth rather than the man. The film's final image lingered, a still shot of Darius standing in the rotunda, Kyel sleeping against his chest, the screen behind them frozen on Garren's fumbled moment of cruelty. The father did not speak. He did not rage. He simply stood, steady, unblinking, while 100 faces turned to him in silence. Below that image, in white serif lettering, appeared the closing line of the film. He did not strike back. He showed the world how memory fights. The sound of children laughing echoed faintly through the polished corridor of the newly renovated Terminal 7. Past the security gates, and near Gate C-17, stood a glass-walled room glowing warmly against the airport's sterile lighting. Above its sliding door, etched in brushed steel, 3 simple words gleamed beneath soft downlights: the Kyel room. Inside, the hum of filtered air mingled with the quiet thump of soft play blocks and cushioned flooring. There were no harsh lights, no cold chairs, just a space meant for innocence. On the far wall, mounted beneath reinforced glass, hung a single black frame containing a crisp digital still, its timestamp intact, showing the slow arc of steaming coffee suspended midair. Beneath it, in block serif, only if forgotten, Lennox Vale stood just beneath the frame, his janitor's badge long replaced by a sleeker one. Integrity Officer, Terminal 7. He adjusted a display of brochures on child travel safety, then turned as a family entered, two boys in tow, both laughing, one trying to peek into the toy cabinet. The father looked toward Lennox with curious eyes. "Is that real?" the man asked, nodding toward the frame. Lennox didn't speak immediately. He knelt beside the younger boy, handed him a plush toy, then stood and looked back at the frame with a mix of reverence and memory. "It's real," he said finally. "A man didn't shout that day. He didn't swing or storm. He just proved it." Back in the city's Southern Detention Ward, Garren Myles sat at a metal desk, the overhead light casting harsh shadows across his notebook. He tapped his pen once, paused, then wrote slowly, the words stiff but deliberate. "I didn't think the man would respond. But he didn't fight me, he dismantled me. And I finally understand why." He closed the journal and stared at the page before folding it inside an envelope marked Request for Educational Transfer. He already knew what the answer would be. 2 weeks ago, he'd been denied enrollment in the Correctional Youth Reform Program. Unsuitable for leadership exposure, the memo read. Still, writing was allowed. So he wrote. Each entry, another attempt at understanding how he'd become the man who spilled boiling coffee on a child for nothing more than perceived defiance. And elsewhere, miles away from courtrooms, protests, and policy councils, Commander Darius Trenell sat cross-legged on a thick rug in the corner of his home. He was not in uniform. No briefcase, no mission. Just a father in a t-shirt, watching a moment unfold. Kyel was standing, one hand on the edge of a nearby table for balance, the other outstretched, reaching toward a low wooden shelf just beyond his toddler grip. His legs wobbled. His lip trembled with determination. Then his foot slid forward, followed by the other. A step, then another. A giggle of surprise broke from the boy's mouth as he took a third. Darius didn't move. He didn't reach for a phone. He didn't speak. He just watched. The soft afternoon light bathed the room in gold. A breeze moved the curtains slightly. The only sound was Kyel's unsteady breath and the near-silent creak of the floor beneath his tiny feet. Darius leaned forward slightly, heart pounding not with fear, but with reverence. Kyel made it to the shelf, steadied himself, then turned proudly, his eyes searching. When he spotted his father, he let out a squeal and raised both arms. Darius opened his, and Kyel ran into them. A beat passed, the kind that doesn't need music, doesn't need witnesses. Darius whispered, pressing his forehead gently to his son's. Some moments, he said quietly, aren't meant for playback. They're meant for peace. The applause had faded. The final policy report had been read. But no one expected what happened next. From the side of the grand stage at the National Fatherhood Summit, the heavy maroon curtains parted. A tall, steady figure emerged, not in uniform, not in polished shoes or adorned with medals. Just a dark jacket, sleeves rolled up, a quiet presence. In his left hand, he held the tiny hand of a toddler walking confidently beside him. Kyel, now just over a year old, blinked at the lights but didn't flinch. The silence that followed his father's entrance was not awkward. It was reverent. Darius Trenell stepped up to the center podium, no notes in hand. The projector screens behind him displayed nothing. No resume, no accolades. Only a blank slate, a silent screen. The summit's host had introduced the next speaker as a man who stood for justice without raising a fist. But that was all anyone knew. Until now. He adjusted the mic once, then let go. He didn't look at the crowd immediately. He looked down at Kyel. The boy gripped the hem of his father's pant leg and smiled, then waddled over to stand just beneath the podium. Only then did Darius begin. I didn't come here today to talk about airports, or protocols, or what's already been done. His voice was calm, unhurried, yet every syllable landed with quiet force. I came here to talk about memory. The room of nearly 800 men, fathers, mentors, coaches, leaders, fell completely still. We remember the milestones. First steps, first words, first birthdays. But memory isn't always made of joy. Sometimes, memory is forged in fire, and what we do after determines whether it becomes a scar or a signal. He paused. His eyes moved across the crowd, not to intimidate, but to hold space. My son doesn't remember the pain, but I do. He doesn't remember the burn or the sound he made when hot liquid hit his chest, but I do. And I don't carry that memory like a weapon. I carry it like a warning. There was a subtle shift in the crowd, a quiet shuffle of posture, a tension sharpening. He continued, when they spilled that coffee, they didn't just burn a child's skin. They spilled something else, something deeper. They poured doubt on what safety means, on whether our silence as fathers is interpreted as peace or permission. Gasps were audible. Whispers died quickly as Darius leaned forward, not raising his voice, but tightening the space around his words. Many of you teach your sons to be strong, to be brave. But let me ask you, what does your silence sound like? Is it the silence of shame, or is it the silence of readiness? A man in the second row, a youth counselor, gripped his chest. Another, an airport supervisor, leaned forward, his hands clenched under his chin. The summit, which had been filled with panel discussions and policy briefings all day, was now pulsing with something much more human. I didn't retaliate, Darius said plainly. I didn't shout. I didn't strike. I didn't chase headlines or hurl blame. Because the most powerful way to defend a child is with proof, with patience, and with a silence loud enough to shake the ground beneath injustice. He glanced down again. Kyel was staring at his own shoe, fascinated by the laces. I didn't come here to inspire you, Darius added. I came to remind you. And then he stepped back. One step. Two. He picked up Kyel, not dramatically, just naturally. A father lifting a child. The boy wrapped his arms around his father's neck. The moment didn't need music or applause. It needed only memory. The screen behind him flickered to life. Not a video, not a clip, just a single sentence, already etched into the new ethics charter that bore Kyel's name. You don't need a weapon to defend your child. You need proof, patience, and a silence loud enough to shake the ground beneath injustice. And when that silence speaks, let the world never look away again. Moments later, the bodyguard stepped forward, his presence freezing the entire terminal. The officer's confidence evaporated as federal agents arrived, turning a simple act of cruelty into a career-ending disaster. If you believe real authority protects the innocent with precision, control, and unstoppable justice, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores racism, abuse of authority, and a moment vigilance and courage confront cruelty. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, accountability, and protecting the vulnerable.